was a year ago, and there was talk that we were going to get a rate cut and maybe a series of rate cuts. And I thought it would not be a good idea, but I think they're going to do a rate cut. And when they do, the long end will go up and not follow the short end, which is counterintuitive. And that is what we got, Chris. The long end went up a little bit, not a lot. It went up some and surprised a lot of people. I wasn't the least bit surprised. Okay, now I think we're in the same framework. If we get a rate cut, I think the long end is going to go up.
Well, hello there, my friends, and welcome on in because, as you can see, not only am I Chris Marcus from Arcadia Economics, but we are joined once again by perhaps the most popular person to ever be able to say and spell the words gold and silver, one of our star attractions here on the Arcadia show, and always, very status quo, fitting in with PC cultures and norms and being cuddly with his delivery, especially on how he feels of politicians and central bankers. So, Jim, I have a feeling I thought this was going to happen last time, but I'm sure today it'll be just one word answers with nothing to say about any of these things that are going on as we're what date? What is today's date?
July 7th.
Oh, yes, July 7th. Jim,
Right behind me, big guy.
I was being trying to be funny there, Jim, but I will mention that in
Okay.
addition to being the editor of the Hat Trick Letter, Jim also apparently has started a calendar service. Jim, I know you have fantasies of getting your landscaping business up and going one day, so maybe we'll
I,
dig into
I,
that after some treasury yields. Who knows where it will
oh,
go
I,
today, but you look like you're ready to explode there. Dull, shut up. Take it away, buddy. How are you?
I'm doing reasonably well. Under regular assault, but I'm doing reasonably well reacting to the assaults. My goal is to cut hedges. And, I'm not really big on mowing lawns, but I love cutting hedges and climbing trees to, you know, cut off a dead branch. I was hell. I was really hell with hedge clippers when I was a kid. And I don't mind the hot sun. So anyway, that's my goal. That's my next life. But we've got to finish this job, which is getting the reset, getting the gold standard, getting the independence for the nation. Um, this is turning out to be a very difficult road to hoe. And I told people way back in October, November, December, this is not going to be a quick cleanup, even with President Trump. There are some sacred grounds, and I think they're medicine and banking. It's the two-headed monster for the fascism, bankers and doctors. They want you to be poor and sick, and they work together to make you poor and sick. So this is going to take a while. And notice that there have been no prosecutions for the vaccine that resulted in a lot of dead people and injured people. There's been no resolution and announcement of the Epstein files. I think that's a work in progress. We have seen an obstruction still for the central bank digital currency, and I'm glad about that. I think at the end of Trump's term, we're going to still have some very difficult problems that have not been resolved. I don't know where you want to start. I mean, we got the war, we got Shanghai and gold, we've got the Texas issue with the flood. We got a lot of things going on. We got the Middle East, which is a massive problem. I've got some positive words to say about the Middle East. Would you like to start in the Middle East and cover it briefly so that we don't get caught up in it?
Sure. Although, before we get your services of resolving decades of Middle East tension, and I know there's few men calm enough to do that like yourself. But I'd like a question on what you were mentioning with Trump, which I imagine what a lot of people might like to hear your view on this because similar to 2016, we had some people saying, hey, he's the bull in the china shop, he's the outsider, he's going to expose a lot of the things that you talk about a lot, that a lot of us see happening. Kind of mixed feelings of what is really going on. I mean, I had hopes that maybe we be better off economically than with Kamala Harris. It's kind of difficult to see where things stand. Obviously, what they may be planning behind the scenes economically that they're not telling us about. But what would you say so far about the, I guess, almost 5.5 months now that we've seen?
What are my reactions on the Trump 2 administration generally? um, well, I didn't expect that question in general, but I do have some overall impressions. I think he's doing a really good job regarding uh, de-nutting the cabal with bankers and doctors and the elite, the geopolitical elite, like in Geneva and Davos, the visible part, the Davos. I think that behind the scenes, he's engineering a great deal of account confiscation among the elites. Um, I've mentioned this before, and I will again. I've got a couple of military sources, and one of them is rather detailed. Um, for the last 3 or 4 months, we have had a tremendous number of arrests of dangerous, nasty, corrupt, deep state agents. A lot of arrests, and there are. I'm told there are about 25 important tribunals going on, and we only hear about two. Uh, Andrews military base is loaded with tribunals. I'm told that there are like 5 or 6 going on all the time. So there's a lot of arrests, a lot of tribunals, a lot of cleanup, but it seems that Trump has laid off on the medical side the vaccination damage and left that to Robert Kennedy, who I believe is having his life threatened on a regular basis. So the states might take over the anti-pharmaceutical battles, but Trump is doing a number of different things regarding efficiency in the government, regarding gutting elite accounts. It seems to me he spends more time as the head of the Space Force than he does as the head of the nation in the White House. And I know that's a pretty strange thing to say, but he's got a lot of priorities working at the same time. Um, I think he's working a very clever plan in the Middle East. And there's a country that I call the little control country, and I don't mention its name ever. I try never. They're in the southeast corner of the Mediterranean. I call it the little control company country. Um, I think Trump is working a very clever plan, and it's for a limited war in order to prevent a much bigger war. Um, I think he's leading some of the people, the leaders of that little control country. He's leading them onto stage, and he steps back so that we can see their actions, including in that little area that's getting wiped out, the little area that's where the canal, the Ben Gurion Canal, is planned. So I think Trump is very cleverly enabling a war. And I believe half the information about the war details is incorrect, about half. I believe the goal is to remove and to destroy Epstein databases in the little country. And in the other country, Iran, the goal is to remove the databases for extortion and sabotage and assassinations. This is very complex. Most of the data on the war is not correct. It's exaggerations and it's really quite crazy BS lies. The Houthis are a very important player They've actually boxed in a number of U.S. naval vessels, and we're seeing a really big display of what some people call asymmetric warfare. And I included some dollar figures, cost figures, in the June report that was posted in the last couple of days of the month. We've got, like $2 million weapon that does significant damage to a $2 billion ship. It's called asymmetric warfare. And we saw the beginnings of that in Iraq for a very illegitimate war, where they had interactive electronic devices. They even gave it an acronym. That's how popular it was, IED, interactive electronic devices. And what they did was they taped to a little block of Semtex a cell phone, and they put the detonator in connection with the cell phone. So they called the number, and if that device was attached to a tank, it destroyed the tank, which is, I guess, like about a $5 million loss. And the IED little bomb would cost maybe $150. So asymmetric warfare is going on with the Houthis in the Red Sea. My eyes are on the leader, the satanic leader of the little control country, the satanic leader, because I think he was gone 2 years ago. So now it's the masked man pretending to be the leader, prime minister of the little control country. This is very complicated, but very few people know that back in 1980 and 81, when Ayatollah Khomeini took control and created the Islamic Republic of Iran, he wasn't Iranian. His father was British and his mother was Indian. So that's their leader. And, I've got it from a number of different clients, including someone close to my team, that 90% of Iranian population hate the mullahs. And at least half of the people in the little control country hate their leaders. So we're setting up for regime change. That's what I think is the goal, both nations. And what I'm hearing about the Iranian mullahs is something that is getting confirmed maybe a dozen times over the last few years. The mullahs, they're high priests. They're all billionaires with Swiss accounts skimming from the national oil and gas treasures. So they're a criminal class with robes on, acting like religious leaders. The people of Iran just don't want them anymore, and they've got an iron grip. Okay, that's about as much as I want to talk about the Middle East, but let me just say this. The oil price, that is your measuring stick for whether they're going to shut down the Hormuz Strait. And I think it was something like June 23rd, right around then, we had an 11% range on the oil price for a decline. 11% decline if you consider high versus low. And I regard that as a contradiction of any potential oil price spike. China warned Iran, do not shut down the Hormuz Strait. They have over, I think, 40% of their oil and gas coming from the Gulf region that relies on the Hormuz Strait. By the way, for those who don't know their geography, and that includes a lot of people, the Hormuz Strait is 22 miles wide. It's over 30 kilometers wide. So blocking it is not easy. That's 22 Mississippi rivers. River is wide. Okay, mining it would be a different story. You could have mines that are, 15, 20 feet underwater, and that'll cause a lot of problems, a lot of damage. But I regard the oil price Chris, as the measuring stick. I don't think we're going to see an oil spike. I think we're going to see a resolution, and it's very possible. Yeah, that's it. It's
Nice
very
picture, right?
possible.
Yeah.
That's a great picture. Um, and I believe to the south is United Arab Emirates. I believe. Um,
I'll bet you're big there.
I don't know what that means.
I
Okay.
I don't know many people from United Arab Emirates, but I just somewhere in there I assume big Jim
I
Willie audience.
I have no contacts. I used to know one guy in Dubai. Um, let me just say that it would not surprise me
They should
if
get
a
you on a gold advertisement over there. You'd be like Joe Montana for Augustus Precious Metals. Imagine all the Emirates seeing Jim, life-size golden Jim Willie, and then realizing they need that in their portfolio. But I'll
Ron,
I'll behave.
it would not surprise me if a number of top mullahs, including Khamenei, fled Iran seeking asylum, and maybe they would find it in Russia. I don't know. I'm expecting a surprise of regime change both in Iran and the little country. Um, it's going to be interesting because that would bring about a new dawn for calm and peaceful activity in the Gulf region. But I'll tell you one hotbed right now, it's Qatar. They call it Qatar. I call it Qatar. They're hosting Hamas and letting them live the high life. And they're getting small and medium-sized attacks in Qatar. Okay, they got a lot of LNG activity, liquefied natural gas, working with commerce with Russia. A lot of LNG sales into Europe, and UAE is important. I'm going to do a little segue here, Chris. Please go, please go with me. There's a lot of activity with crypto in UAE, and I believe they're going to be a very important center for legitimizing, popularizing, and making more known the XRP role in trade payment. UAE, it could be the cradle of BRICS activity launching XRP payments. I'm excited by it. I know that a few years ago, like maybe even 5 years ago, UAE spent $230 million to develop their crypto center and to get integrated in their banking system. They've done some clever things in UAE. They did this is 3 years ago, but it was a really important event. They did a UAE energy deal with France, and they took, no, I'm sorry, UAE was involved. India did India did an LNG deal and an energy deal with France, and they took UAE dirham as payment. So UAE is inventive. They're innovative. Let me repeat that. India did an energy deal with France, and they took UAE currency, the dirham, as payment. And that is pegged to the dollar. So I wouldn't be at all surprised before long if there are other deals among BRIC nations with Europe that take XRP as payment. This is going to be very interesting and very exciting, but we got still roadblocks, moronic roadblocks that Trump has allowed to continue regarding Securities and Exchange Commission setting the rules and making them clear. They're calling it regulatory clarity, regulation clarity, and it's tiresome. It's tiresome. It's getting old. We need to move on. Hey, Donald, if you're listening, get with it. The SEC is a pain in the ass. Oh boy. So
I
that's where we go
Jim
ahead.
just you mentioned Trump and message to him. I assume he would already be a hat trick letter subscriber and the entire
Indirectly,
cabinet as
probably.
well. Is that correct?
Indirectly, yes. He's
Okay.
got an agent who runs cover for him with the hat trick letter.
You got to be discreet about that. And Jim, just since I know you're perfectionist to quality, here
What do you
we
got there?
have the multiple pronunciations. I will add that I dated a Persian woman about 10 years ago, and I remember she pronounced it cutter
Cut,
almost, but
cutter,
looks
cutter,
like you're going with the British
Qatar.
version. Never ideal, especially in the Middle East, to go with the British view of things, especially
Well,
on the matter of Iran, where I'll be careful how I say this, but sometimes it's odd to me that everyone goes around saying Iran is the terrorist, where understand they've made certain comments about Israel over the years, yet there is an irony to me that a country that dropped not one but two atomic weapons is the one saying who can or cannot have
oh, I
them.
know. It's irony. It's tremendous. As for Qatar, I don't like using a word that sounds like a cookie cutter. Cookie
I can
cutter,
feel you on that
cutter.
one. I hear
Yeah,
you. It's
cookie
not
cutter.
right.
I don't. Yeah, make it Qatar so it's well known and the accent is on the second. So you know what I'm talking about rather than a cookie cutter. Um, all right.
I'm sure their
Oma,
government officials will be watching this episode as well. Well, Jim,
let me.
one last question before we switch on that. I've heard from someone I respect. I'll leave his name aside, not like it's a big secret, but he presented the thesis that the we had the strikes in Iran, and then a couple of days later, Trump's going there saying, "All right, everybody, back off, stop now." And this speaker was suggesting that perhaps the true emphasis behind that was based on China and rare earths, and that essentially China was making that decision. And if the US wanted to continue having access to the rare earths, that was their option to go along with it. I don't know if that's correct, although certainly quite interesting. And obviously, when we want to get inside of the Trump cabinet behind the scenes, we call Jim Willie. So what say you to that, my friend?
Uh, are you saying that China wanted Trump to back off Iran so that Trump could have access to Chinese rare earths? I'm not sure what you're asking. Was that the question?
Yeah, that was the basic premise, that
Oh, okay. Okay.
essentially it was China. It wasn't that Trump said, all right, we need to do this, but China, for their own reasons, saying, we have this issue here. You want us to continue playing ball, do that. And I'm curious if you had any opinion on what
I
that
don't
might
have
be what
much on
happened.
that except that China derives a very large portion uh, of their oil and gas through the Hormuz Straits and quite a lot from Iran. And this has been going on for 20 or 30 years. So I don't know that China has any firm opinion or desire regarding leadership of Iran, the leadership. I think China just wants to see a country that continues to sell them oil and gas. I don't even know what China's position is on Iranian. I didn't talk about the Iranian nuclear program, but let me make a quick comment. Um, I don't think that the United States, England, and France have the right to tell any country what they should or can do in a nuclear program if their main emphasis is to be electricity generation. Um, I don't know that the United States and Britain and France have the, what's the word, legitimate monopoly on dictating nuclear policy. Now, notice we got a real ugly skirmish going on between India and Pakistan. Those are two nuclear powers. And Pakistan might be working cooperatively with Iran. Um, the problem in Iran, from the vantage point of the British and American, the Anglo-American side, is that the output of nuclear refined material is far more than what Iran needs to generate electricity. And you got to hearken back to 2002 and 3 when we said that Iraq had a nuclear threat against the little country in the southeast corner of the Mediterranean. And that turned out to be a lie. There were no weapons of mass destruction, but there were a lot of Papa Bush purchases by Saddam Hussein, of biological weapons. So they use the nuclear threat as a justification for war. And the last time they did, it was a false justification, a false causa belli, false justification for war. As I said before, I think the goal is regime change in Iran and the little country. And I think the more guaranteed is in the little country, where the guy wearing the mask who goes by the name of Bibi, I think he's going to hightail it. And then we'll hear that he's dead when he was actually dead 2 years ago. Kind of like Biden. Biden was dead years ago, and the first dead president ever to be the president of the United States, the first dead guy. I mean, we're watching a bit of a comedy. It's a bit of like Saturday Night Live. We got a lady now who's come forward and said, yes, I operated the auto pen, but she's not said that Biden was dead. That's what we're working toward at the top of the pyramid. And we're about here. We've got a little more to go. The pyramid of information, the auto pen, the threats on usage, the lock on budget spending for USAID, for Ukraine, etc. Anyway, I'm expecting some positive things out of the Middle East and out of Ukraine. I expect that the Russians are going to take 90% of the country and leave them the butthole of Kiev. It's being vacated right now. They're going to take, I think, 90% of the nation and leave them the butthole of Kiev. They want to retreat there. They want to manage the underground trafficking functions and finance. Leave them the butthole in Kiev, and the Russians will take all the eastern, they call them oblasts, which are basically like provinces. The Russians will take Odessa and the Crimea. There's no way the Russians will part with that. They want the access to the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. But I think the Russians are going to take all that Burisma property in Western Ukraine. I got a little analogy. It's so that the listening audience can comprehend the size of Ukraine. I did this 4 years ago. I was curious. I said I knew Ukraine was large, but I didn't know how large. So I said to a friend of mine, I bet you it's at least 2 or 3 Midwestern states. So I did the square miles, square kilometer, I don't care which. I did the area of Ohio, Indiana, Iowa, Illinois, and it was still short. So I added Missouri. Missouri is not considered a Midwest state. Well, maybe it is. It's kind of in the middle. 5 states, same landmass. That's a big country, Ukraine. And the Western side, you got a lot of, Hunter Biden and the Biden family lies and conspiracies and all that regarding Burisma. And that's for gas. That's gas supply and also some fracking. And their agricultural dominance is in the left side, the West. Their industrial side is on the right side, the East. And believe it or not, there are reports that the Chinese are operating some of the industrial sites in the east of Ukraine, producing for the Russian military, which is their long-standing role. They make trucks, they make jeeps, they make tanks. I don't think they make missiles. They make the vehicles. Okay, there's a lot going on. I think Russia Here's what my deeper military source said. They're working toward regime change in Iran and the little country, and Trump is going to get a free rein to go, do what he wishes, which is, bomb and make up stories about the damage, which I think half of them are completely fabricated. Okay, Trump gets permission in Iran, and Putin will get permission in Ukraine. It's quid pro quo. Take care of the Middle East, Trump, and Putin will take care of Ukraine and get it over with. I'd like to see NATO dissolved. Let me just say that as a final point.
Well, I hear you, and I thought it was somewhat telling when a couple of weeks ago Trump was saying that wanted NATO to increase whatever percentage, with 2% to 5%, increasing even further the military spending. And hey, what do I know? Although it seems somewhat unfortunate that you have the world in, especially these governments, in so much debt. And yet, what is the solution is always to somehow build more guns. So we had that deal with Saudi Arabia, and I was looking at it with Vince Lancy, and I'm saying, well, what actually we saw? Oh, weapons. So continuing our role as an arms dealer, although, Jim, now that you have
Let, let
covered
me let me make a comment about Ukraine
please.
and NATO in particular. Okay, this is again from the military deeper source. Trump will request more funding from the European nations for NATO activity and weaponry. He'll ask for more, and they're not in a position to give more. Trump is asking for the impossible because he wants to have France, Germany, Italy, Netherlands, and Spain refuse. And if those member nations of NATO and the European Union refuse to fund NATO to a greater degree, then Trump can say, we're not going to fund them either. And then NATO runs out of funds from legitimate sovereign sources and will have to resort, and it'll become well known, they'll have to resort to money laundering sources of funds for NATO. And then we got a narco NATO. The end will not be North Atlantic, it'll be the Narcotics Atlantic Treaty Organization. Narco NATO will be against Russia. And I'm hoping that the global military alliance can cut off the narcotics. Okay. I think Trump is working a game to get a refusal from the European nations, so that he can dissolve and defund NATO, force them into a corner, and then have them dissolve. That is what the military guy is indicating as the goal, and it's not going to be quick.
Well, I hear you, Jim, and perhaps best to leave that there because
Yeah, let's leave it there.
I know people now that they've gotten Jim Willie on foreign policy are hungry for some Jim Willie on domestic, economic, and monetary affairs. So, a lot to dig into here. First of all, I will ask you this one. We had Tom Luongo on. Are you familiar with Tom? Ever heard him before?
Yeah. I pick up on his stuff because I regard him as the top of the heap among geopolitical analysts. Top of the heap.
All righty. Well, then, with that said, you may be aware that, let's call it back in 2022, I suppose, basically when the Fed started hiking rates following COVID, and almost everyone, myself included, were thinking, all right, there's pivots coming. They're going to run into pressure with the higher rates and back off. Tom was quite adamant, saying they are not going to do that, and he turned out to be right because we got higher for a lot longer than any. I didn't hear anyone else saying what he was saying. And with that said, I had him on here last week, and he said he's expecting a 50 basis point rate cut out of the Fed in July. And I will pull up our futures pricing, which certainly is indicating a different outcome. So quite interested to see how that goes. But do you have any comment on what you might be expecting? What is the Jim Willie model calculating there. Here we have futures pricing in 95% chance of a pause. So if we get to 50, that would certainly be quite a shock. Might be even more shocking than last year when
Could
Jerome.
you could you summarize the graph? It's saying 95%
So
chance of
we're currently at
no
target
rate
rate
cut.
of 425 to 450. So at the July meeting, they're saying 95% chance we stay there versus a 4.7% chance
Okay,
they cut a
I
quarter.
know what
So
you're
if
saying.
Tom is correct, that is
Going to go against the grain of what we're seeing in.
although I guess Trump would be happy if he's right about that. So
All
what do you
right,
see coming there, Jimmy?
let me make a preface. Um,
Please,
it
please,
it was
preface
a
away.
year ago, and there was talk that we were going to get a rate cut and maybe a series of rate cuts. And I thought it would not be a good idea, but I think they're going to do a rate cut. And when they do, the long end will go up and not follow the short end, which is counterintuitive. And that is what we got, Chris. The long end went up a little bit, not a lot. It went up some and surprised a lot of people. I wasn't the least bit surprised. Okay, now I think we're in the same framework. If we get a rate cut, I think the long end is going to go up.
Excuse me, Jim. Just if I could, to support what you're saying there, we actually did see that already last year.
Yeah.
Let's take
And
the 1 year chart back here because basically there's September 1st, September 8th. You had the rates at 364. This was a week before the 50 basis point cut, and you saw a yield surge.
that's the
It went
10. We're looking
from
at the 10-year.
Yeah,
I
this is a
see at the
10
top.
year went from 360 to 3, 4 months later in January, you're up over 100 basis points. So we did
Yep.
see
Yep.
that last year,
So,
along with the dollar index rallying as well, which perhaps we can get to next, but I'll let you continue there.
um, the long end was saying, I believe this is what they were saying. You got to interpret. There's no book you can just look up. The long end was saying, you got a U.S. government debt crisis. You're lowering rates. You're making it less attractive to support U.S. government debt in auctions. You're actually increasing the risk of inflation. And for all the wrong decisions there, we're going to go up in the 10-year yield. We're going to go up. And that's pretty much what I expected. And that's why I have the interpretation. It's the same interpretation I had before the rate cut a little over a year ago. I think the same thing is happening now, but it's gotten a lot more thorny, difficult, ugly, conflicting, because now you've got controversy over a $2.3 billion Federal Reserve building. They're calling it a castle. You got Trump, who's insulting Powell. I wish he would make dagger points about the BlackRock connection. That's been out of the conflict room. But he's actually saying, Powell, you're the chairman of the Fed. You should resign. You're a disgrace. You're representing the elites. You're not representing the households of the United States that need lower rates. Let me just give you a quick rundown of what's really important for inflation in the United States. There are a few. It's inflation based on interest rates, food prices, fuel prices, and insurance. And we need all of them to come down. Insurance went up a lot as a result of the COVID bullshit, the pandemic. I want to go on record again as saying there was a planned pandemic. There was no pandemic. I have clients who reported about what happened in Wuhan in China. There were no deaths outside the city limits of Wuhan, which means it was not a biological event. It was a radiation event. The illicit lockdown was just that, illegal, illicit, and it destroyed a lot of businesses. I have a friend in Los Angeles who has 3 clothing shops, upscale clothing shops. He was forced to shut down, but the department stores were left open, like Neiman Marcus, a competitor. Okay, so this was an assault on small business with the lockdown. Back to the interest rates. We're seeing a reduction in gasoline and diesel. We're seeing it. And it's because the supply is not interrupted like it was before. The Rockefellers want higher oil prices. They make more money. And I believe the Obama 3 administration, otherwise called the Biden show, the Obama 3 administration had the Rockefellers running the energy policy and Victoria Nuland running the foreign policy, and maybe Susan Rice running some of the domestic policy. But the domestic policy was really quite simple. It was just destroy the supply chain wherever we can. That was the Obama 3 administration objective, which some people call, I guess the majority of people call, I guess maybe all the people call, the Biden show, the Obama 3 administration. Okay, back to the nut of your question. I don't know if Powell's going to cut rates. If he does, he'll look weak and he'll look like he's on a leash held by Donald Trump. On the other hand, the bankers might want an engineered bond rally even at the long end so they can get out from under still almost $500 billion of underwater bond assets, the majority of which are treasuries. Powell might come up with a justification that is not the same as the Trump justification for lower rates, and he might get Wall Street behind him to generate a bond rally. But there's a twist here. If they get a bond rally at the long end and they get a bond rally at the short end, they're going to have a hard time with auctions. They've had a hard time in the last 2 or 3 months with bond auctions. This is a big year for supply. I thought it was going to be last year, but apparently it turned out to be this year. It's several trillion that must be sold. And what they're doing is the same thing they did last year at auctions. We hand money under the table to Belgium, England, Ireland, Cayman, and elsewhere, and they do the bond bidding. And what I noticed last year, this was only one instance I saw. I'll be clear about this. Belgium was a big buyer at a bond auction, and 2 months later did not show up on the tick report. So I think that was lent money from the United States, and then they paid back the loan, and under the table, it went back to the U.S. Treasury Department or to the Exchange Stabilization Fund, which is like a gigantic spleen. It's a spleen. It's a storage center for an enormous amount of Treasury bond blood. Chris, I think we're going to get a rate cut, but not for the reasons Trump wants. And they're going to try to do an engineered bond rally across the entire yield curve. It's not going to steepen like it did last year. That's where short rates go down, long rates go up, so it becomes a steeper curve. I think they're going to see not a flatter. They're going to see the whole curve go down. That's what I want. And you know, the bankers might say we want it for our bonds that are underwater, but we also need that for the federal debt. And we're going to be approaching 40 trillion. Gets crazy. We're going to approach 40 trillion pretty quickly. And I want people to understand what a trillion is. If you had $1 million bills packed one on top of the other, and if you ignore the squishing effect, they would reach the height of the Empire State Building. If you had $1 billion $1 bills, $1 billion $1 bills, it would go up into the stratosphere a couple hundred miles up. If you had $1 trillion $1 bills, it would go a third of the way to the moon. Okay, $1 trillion is a big, big number, and most people throw it around not recognizing how big the number is. And we got 38 trillion in debt. I'm going to throw out a zinger that'll be a segue here. I've got it on pretty good authority, Chris, that Trump, if he wanted to, he could bring forward 100,000 tons and reduce approximately 10 trillion, maybe $12 trillion of the debt. He could do it next month. But we're not done cleaning out the deep state. And we're not done removing the risk that if it were put on the table, some of it would be stolen by the cabal. That is a very big problem now. We've got a lot of plans for global funds, the Saint Germain Trust, QFS being installed at the banking level, and it's being kept in the slow lane because the deep state and the cabal are not yet cleaned out. And it takes time. I think it's going to be another year.
Well, all right, my friends, there is part one of this month's interview with Jim Willie. As you can see, my man sure had plenty to say, and don't worry, part two is coming up just in one day, tomorrow at 8 p.m. Eastern, where Jim will talk about how he sees this hitting the gold and silver markets, and a lot more about the things that are going on there. And just in case you don't know how to contain yourself for another night, well, you can always go and pick up your Silver Chopper Ben Bernanke 26-ounce 3.9 fines silver helicopter. That left Craig Hemke and Bill Holter saying, here is the Silver Chopper Ben Bernanke.
That is so cool.
Can you even see his tie flying in the wind while he throws out $100 bills? Look at him getting ready to throw that money out there.
I see that.
Because that's what it looks like when
That
Ben
even
Bernanke,
looks like his sorry ass.
Look at the size of the bald silvery head.
Yeah.
It's enormous. Back propeller spin too.
How many ounces is that?
That's 26 ounces of 3.9 fine silver, homie. As you can see here, some of the key features with your Silver Chopper Ben figurine, you can really get the control panel. Look, there's a whole dashboard for Ben to fly. He wants to fly onto your desk and throw $100
here,
bills
Ben.
down. Look at the precision.
I see that.
Crazy old bastard.
He's got 2 sets of spinnable propellers
This
built.
thing is great.
Dude, you could fly that thing.
Wow. I could.
Look how happy he is. I think he's actually going to get out there and throw the $100 bills. Jerome, no!
There'll be $1,000 bills by then.
I got this.
I like it.
Get the history before it's made. Just click the link below to get your Silver Chopper Ben now. So to get your Silver Chopper Ben, click on the link in the description field below, and hope you enjoyed our time with Jim today. We'll see you back here tomorrow for part 2, 8 p.m. Eastern.